The cold February morning of 2023 began with an unusual stir on a quiet suburban road in Keene, New Hampshire. 5 unmarked police cars silently pulled up in front of a small, snow-covered wooden house, their red and blue lights flashing against the frost-draped old pines. Neighbors peeked through curtains as officers in heavy winter jackets, carrying files and cameras, quietly positioned themselves around the porch. Inside, Henry Larkin, 81, was brewing coffee, a morning ritual he'd maintained for years since retiring from the local cement factory. A knock came at 7:14 a.m. Henry Larkin, Vermont State Police. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection to the murder of Beatrice Larkin in 1973. Witnesses said Henry's hand trembled slightly as he set down his cup, but his face remained eerily calm, as if he'd known this moment was coming. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. In the winter of 1973, snow blanketed the town of Ashford Hollow, Vermont. Wind howled through the pine forest like long, drawn-out breaths, slipping through narrow door cracks, carrying a bone-dry chill. The Larkin family's wooden house stood isolated at the end of a dirt road, 3 miles from town, faintly lit by a small window's yellow glow. Outside, Beatrice Larkin, 12, bent down to place a bowl of food for the dog in the yard. A brief bark echoed, then faded into the wind. The girl softly called its name, her voice swallowed by the white snow. Inside, water ran steadily from the kitchen sink. Marjorie, Bea's mother, washed the last dishes, her hands reddened by the cold. In the living room, Henry Larkin, her stepfather, sat motionless by an old radio, its crackling evening news blending with the storm outside. The small house held just 3 people, each lost in their own world, unaware that time was slipping toward midnight. A faint thud came from the back porch. Marjorie wiped her hands, stepped out, and called for her daughter. No response. She opened the back door, and a gust of wind rushed in, flinging the curtain and scattering tiny snowflakes across the wooden floor. The darkness outside swallowed everything. On the snow, only small footprints led to the yard's edge before vanishing into the white. The dog lay still, its body snow-dusted, no longer breathing. Marjorie stepped back, hands shaking, and turned inside. Henry looked up, eyes dull. "The kid runs off sometimes. Don't make a fuss." His voice was low, weary, as if rehearsed. Snow fell heavier, wind rattling the tin roof, mingling with the soft creak of the door. Marjorie sank into a chair, staring at her daughter's red coat, still hanging on the rack. The room seemed to shrink, the silence stifling. The clock's hands moved slowly against the sound of the wind. As dawn's faint light broke through the forest, Marjorie stood, her hands stiff from cold and fear. Her cream-colored rotary phone sat silently in the kitchen, like a piece of evidence. She lifted the receiver, dialed the town police, her voice breaking in ragged breaths. "My daughter, she didn't come home." On the other end, a few seconds of silence, only the wind whistling through door cracks and the phone's faint static, as if swallowed by the snow. Then a tired male voice, "Say that again, Mrs. Larkin? When did your daughter go missing?" Marjorie didn't answer right away. She only let out a soft sob, her lips trembling and blue. Outside, the sky lightened faintly, the forest's edge blanketed white, every sound muffled by the cold snow. When the first light of morning pierced the gray clouds, 2 police cars crawled up the icy dirt road to the house. Red lights swept slow circles, reflecting off the powdery snow. Sheriff Daniel Crow stepped out, his boots sinking deep, breath-forming clouds. He looked at the small wooden house, its narrow windows fogged, the weak yellow light still burning from the night before. Marjorie stood on the porch, face gaunt, still clutching the unhooked phone receiver. Crow spoke softly. "Calm down, ma'am. We'll search the area." He turned to a younger officer. "Get the K9 unit to the woods out back." All morning, snow fell thickly, wind wailing through the trees. The search team, a few townsfolk, firefighters, 2 officers, formed a line, sweeping every meter of snow. They moved slowly, probing the soft ice with sticks, leaving even circular tracks. From a distance, a canine dog's hoarse, Urgent barks rang out. Everyone stopped. Crow knelt, his gloved hand brushing fresh snow to reveal a faint footprint-shaped indent heading toward the woods. The tracks went one way, then vanished. The wind strengthened, covering tracks in minutes. Crow sighed, signaling a man nearby to mark the spot with a wooden stake. Not far off, an officer bent to pick up something protruding from the snow, a tattered red fabric, frozen stiff. Nearby, a small round object glinted, a child-scratched aluminum flashlight, its battery dead. Crow held it for a long moment before slipping it into an evidence bag. Meanwhile, Henry Larkin stood behind the kitchen window, a cigarette between his fingers, thin smoke curling into the cold air. He watched the searchers comb the woods, his eyes cloudy and expressionless. Marjorie slumped in a chair by the stove, hands covering her face. The house was deathly quiet, save for the steady tick of the wall clock, like a slow countdown of time. By noon, the clouds lowered, snow turning to sleet, small pellets pinging off the searchers' helmets. Crow scanned with binoculars, his face tense. No drag marks, no skid tracks. If she left the house, she'd have come back. In these conditions, a kid couldn't go far. No one replied. The wind carried his words into the white void. Late afternoon, the search expanded to the edge of Echo Lake. A Vermont State helicopter circled above, its light sweeping the frozen water and forest slopes. On the ground, the exhausted team paused. Snow had buried most of the morning's markers. There was nothing left to find but wind and ice. When Crow returned to the house, Henry was still at his post, staring out the window. Marjorie approached, voice breaking. "Did he say anything? Did they find anything?" Crow only shook his head. "We'll keep looking tomorrow." Henry took a final drag, stubbed his cigarette on a porcelain plate, and walked away without a word. 3 days later, the search officially ended, no new traces. On Crow's desk at the Ludlow police station, a local newspaper lay open to page 3. Police continue search for 12-year-old girl missing in Ashford Hollow blizzard. No new leads. The printed words blurred under a coffee stain, as if the story itself was dissolving with the snow outside. At Vermont's forest edge, wind still roared through old pines, and Bee's last small footprints had vanished completely. On the fourth morning after the search paused, snow began melting into murky puddles around the forest base. On the dirt road to the Larkin house, 2 police cars rolled slowly, tires crunching cracked ice. Sheriff Daniel Crow sat in the front, eyes piercing the fogged windshield. He was silent, his gloved hands gripping a notebook. Beside him was Officer Ellen Birch, younger, her eyes still tinged with doubt. 3 days of searching in a blizzard yielded only faint footprints and a scrap of fabric. But Crow knew the cold couldn't erase everything. If the girl didn't run away, this house had to say something. They stopped, opened the doors. Henry Larkin waited on the porch, cigarette in hand, ashing into the snow, as if smoking was his only way to stay alert. Marjorie stood behind, eyes red, clutching her daughter's red coat to her chest. Crow nodded a greeting, then stepped inside with 2 officers. The air inside was warmer but thick with damp and cigarette smoke. Crow removed his gloves, walked to the kitchen, where Marjorie said she last saw her daughter. A spilled milk glass lay tilted on the table, dried milk crusted white on the wood, surrounded by shards from a broken cup. He crouched, his flashlight grazing the floor. Under the table, near the wall, a dark brown streak stretched about a hand's length. Crow wiped it lightly with a cloth. A metallic tang rose. "Blood," he said softly. Ellen marked it, placing a numbered card by the stain. Near the sink, a half-used dish rag lay wet, part in the basin, part draped out. The basin water was murky, smelling of bleach mixed with something sharp and acrid. Crow noted odd scrub marks on the wooden floor, where snow had blown in, as if someone had wiped a small area clean, then stopped. "No footprints outside," he said. "Only adult shoe prints in here." Ellen scribbled quickly. The back door stood ajar, its rusty hinge creaking. Cold forest wind gusted in, carrying snowflakes. Crow checked the lock. No pry marks. He closed the door, tested the latch from inside, then opened it. The hinge moved smoothly. "This door can only be opened from inside," he said. The officers exchanged glances. That meant, if the girl went out this door, she or someone inside opened it. No break-in, no stranger's tracks. Crow climbed to Bea's small upstairs bedroom. The room was oddly neat. The bed was made, blanket tucked tight, a worn notebook and stubby pencil still on the desk. At the bed's head sat an old stuffed bear, head tilted, one eye missing. He touched it lightly. Dust rose, smelling of mildew. A 12-year-old wouldn't run away, forgetting her favorite toy, coat and flashlight. On the rack, her red coat hung, something she'd have worn in a blizzard. The officers left the house, checking the porch. Under a thin snow layer, they found a scratched floorboard near where the dog lay that night. Crow crouched, tapping the gouge with his stick, guessing it came from a heavy object hitting or being dragged. He exhaled, breath clouding before him. Back inside, he whispered to Ellen, "No signs of a break-in." It happened inside. He stepped to the back door, looking to the woods. No footprints remained, snow covering all. He stood still, picturing that night, the small girl on the porch, her weak flashlight, the dog barking, then silent. Someone opened the door, called her name, and then, just wind. Crow closed the door, the hinge screeching slowly. He turned to the kitchen, where the spilled milk glass lay untouched, the rags still damp, and the child's red coat hung neatly on its hook. In his notebook, he wrote one line, "No break-in. Blood in kitchen. Door opened from inside. High likelihood incident internal." Stepping onto the porch, wind stinging his face, Crow glanced at Henry Larkin, leaning against the doorframe, eyes dark. He'd gone too far to believe in a runaway. In his mind, the night's scattered pieces formed a dim shape of a different truth. Not a child fleeing, but something that happened in this house. Crow closed his notebook, saying softly, "We're not looking for a runaway. We're looking for something else." That afternoon, as the forensics team left with the first evidence bags, Crow sat in his patrol car, heater running, jotting notes. Snow fell lightly, melting into streaks on the windshield. He knew the next step was the hardest, questioning the only two people in the house that night. Marjorie was called to the Ludlow station first. She arrived with a neighbor, clutching an old knit scarf, eyes sunken from sleeplessness. The small interrogation room's dim light flickered, the heater wheezing in the corner. Crow sat across, voice low but gentle. "Start from the beginning, ma'am. What happened that night?" Marjorie stared at the table. "She just went outside for a bit," she said, voice halting. "I told her to feed the dog. I heard her talking to it for a while. Then it stopped. I thought she came back in. I was washing dishes, clearing the table. When I looked, the back door was open. I called her a few times, got no answer. I thought maybe she went to a friend's, would be back by morning." Crow asked, "Where was Henry then?" "In the living room. He was listening to the radio. I remember the wind was so loud. Did he go outside?" Marjorie hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe I heard the door, but it could have been the wind. I'm not sure." She looked at Crow, eyes tired, desperate. "She's only 12, you understand. She wouldn't know where to go that far." Crow stayed silent, jotting notes. He'd seen hundreds of mothers report missing children, but rarely an expression so mixed with fear and guilt, like Marjorie hadn't just lost a daughter, but something deeper within herself. Late afternoon, Henry Larkin was summoned. He walked in, coat smelling of cigarette smoke, a faint whiff of motor oil on his sleeves. Crow gestured to a chair. Henry sat slowly, crossing his legs, scanning the room as if measuring the walls. "Larkin," Crow began. "Tell me about that evening, when the girl was still in the house." Henry nodded, voice even, and cold. "I was home all night. The kid spilled a pot of soup. I scolded her a bit. She cried, ran out back. I didn't think much of it. She does that. She's sulky. I listened to the radio, then slept. My wife woke me, said she wasn't back. I told her not to worry. By morning, when she still wasn't there, I knew it was serious. Crow leaned in. Did you go outside that night? Henry shrugged. Don't recall, maybe to the porch for a smoke. I do that. Do you know the dog died by the back door? Henry gave a flat chuckle. It was old, probably froze. Crow stared at him. You think a 12-year-old in a blizzard would open the door, leave, no coat, no proper shoes? Henry raised an eyebrow, exhaling imaginary smoke. She's stubborn. You don't know her. Crow set his pen down, flipped to a new page. Marjorie said she heard the door open. Wasn't sure if it was wind. Can you confirm you opened it? Don't remember. Might have. Or the wind did. Crow closed the door, the hinge screeching slowly. He turned to the kitchen, where the spilled milk glass lay untouched, the rag still damp, and the child's red coat hung neatly on its hook. In his notebook, he wrote one line. No break-in, blood in kitchen. Door opened from inside. High likelihood, incident internal. Stepping onto the porch, wind stinging his face. Crow glanced at Henry Larkin, leaning against the doorframe. Eyes dark. He'd gone too far to believe in a runaway. In his mind, the night's scattered pieces formed a dim shape of a different truth. Not a child fleeing, but something that happened in this house. Crow closed his notebook, saying softly, We're not looking for a runaway. We're looking for something else. That afternoon, as the forensics team left with the first evidence bags, Crow sat in his patrol car, heater running, jotting notes. Snow fell lightly, melting into streaks on the windshield. He knew the next step was the hardest, questioning the only two people in the house that night. Marjorie was called to the Ludlow station first. She arrived with a neighbor, clutching an old knit scarf, eyes sunken from sleeplessness. The small interrogation room's dim light flickered, the heater wheezing in the corner. Crow sat across, voice low but gentle. Start from the beginning, ma'am. What happened that night? Marjorie stared at the table. She just went outside for a bit, she said, voice halting. I told her to feed the dog. I heard her talking to it for a while. Then it stopped. I thought she came back in. I was washing dishes, clearing the table. When I looked, the back door was open. I called her a few times, got no answer. I thought maybe she went to a friend's, would be back by morning. Crow asked, Where was Henry then? In the living room. He was listening to the radio. I remember the wind was so loud. Did he go outside? Marjorie hesitated. I don't know. Maybe I heard the door, but it could have been the wind. I'm not sure. She looked at Crow, eyes tired, desperate. She's only 12, you understand. She wouldn't know where to go that far. Crow stayed silent, jotting notes. He'd seen hundreds of mothers report missing children, but rarely an expression so mixed with fear and guilt, like Marjorie hadn't just lost a daughter, but something deeper within herself. Late afternoon, Henry Larkin was summoned. He walked in, coat smelling of cigarette smoke, a faint whiff of motor oil on his sleeves. Crow gestured to a chair. Henry sat slowly, crossing his legs, scanning the room as if measuring the walls. Larkin, Crow began. Tell me about that evening, when the girl was still in the house. Henry nodded, voice even and cold. I was home all night. The kid spilled a pot of soup. I scolded her a bit. She cried. Ran out back. I didn't think much of it. She does that. She's sulky. I listened to the radio, then slept. My wife woke me, said she wasn't back. I told her not to worry. By morning, when she still wasn't there, I knew it was serious. Crow leaned in. Did you go outside that night? Henry shrugged. Don't recall. Maybe to the porch for a smoke. I do that. Do you know the dog died by the back door? Henry gave a flat chuckle. It was old, probably froze. Crow stared at him. You think a 12-year-old in a blizzard would open the door, leave, no coat, no proper shoes? Henry raised an eyebrow, exhaling imaginary smoke. She's stubborn. You don't know her. Crow set his pen down, flipped to a new page. Marjorie said she heard the door open. Wasn't sure if it was wind. Can you confirm you opened it? Don't remember. Might have, or the wind did. He answered smoothly, without pause. What unnerved Crow wasn't the words, but Henry's breathing, steady, unwavering, not once faltering when speaking of the missing girl. The questioning lasted nearly an hour. When Crow asked about the night a second time, Henry repeated every word verbatim. No additions, no omissions, like a memorized script. I scolded her. She ran off, he said 3 times, eyes avoiding contact. Ellen, taking notes, paused mid-sentence, glancing at Crow. As Crow stood, he closed his notebook, saying slowly, "We'll keep searching. If you recall anything, contact me," Henry replied curtly, voice rough. "If I think of something, I'll let you know." He stood, put on his hat, and left without looking back. After the door closed, Crow leaned against the wall, eyeing the notes. The first, scrawled line, runaway case. He crossed out, writing beside it. Possible domestic involvement. Unprovable. Outside dusk fell slowly. Through the station window, Crow saw the snowy road leading to the forest where the search team had scoured. Wind rose again, rolling ice grains across the glass. He knew this case might dead end. No witnesses, no new evidence, and a man calmer than the innocent. But recalling the dried blood under the kitchen wall, the half-used rag in the sink, and the door opened from inside, he was certain that child didn't leave the house on her own. In his leather notebook, a new page opened, and he wrote a brief, slanted line. Henry Larkin, needs monitoring. Too calm, repeats himself. No eye contact. Crow closed the notebook, capped his pen, and took a deep breath. The heater's warmth dried the frost on the window, leaving streaks like erased traces. He stood, telling Ellen as she gathered files, "We don't have proof, but something's off. I see it in how he looks." Ellen nodded, whispering, "What do you think he's hiding?" Crow replied, "Don't know. But I think when the snow melts, what he buried will surface." Outside, wind from the Green Mountains carried the scent of pine and melting ice. In the small station room, the yellow lamp flickered on the desk, illuminating the final note. Possible domestic involvement, unprovable. 3 days after the first questioning, as the wind calmed and snow shrank under weak spring sun, Crow sat in his small Ludlow station office. On his desk, he spread out all notes, crime scene photos, and the preliminary statements from the 2 in the Larkin house. He began building a timeline, the only thing that could reveal the gaps in that snowy night. Yellow note papers were pinned to a wooden board, each marking an hour, a statement, a fragmented detail. From Marjorie's account, she last saw her daughter feeding the dog. Then she heard the door thud, then silence. Henry said, "I was in the living room, listening to the radio, then went to bed." No detail aligned on timing, no clock, no direct witness. Crow knew he needed pieces from outside that house. That afternoon, he drove to the Pine Hill neighborhood, a sparse row of homes separated by hundreds of yards, mostly old farms or small wooden houses. The first person he met was Sarah Whitman, a middle-aged woman living 3 houses from the Larkins. When Crow asked, she hesitated, recalling, "It was stormy that night. I was still up. Around 9, I heard a dog barking fiercely. The Larkins' dog. It barked for minutes, then stopped dead. I also heard shouting, maybe an adult, couldn't make out words. I thought they were arguing." She paused, looking at Crow. Then it went quiet, like someone turned everything off. Crow wrote every word, then asked, "Did you see any lights or figures outside?" "No, their windows faced the woods. But I remember the dog. It sounded different that night, like it was scared." Bushevant Hob. That evening, Crow stopped at the Hollow Creek gas station, where Henry claimed he went that night for truck fuel. The owner, a silver-haired man named Vince Carver, flipped through his sales log. He looked at Crow, shaking his head. "No Henry Larkin came that night. I remember clear because of the storm. Only 2 customers, A mechanic and a long-haul trucker, both regulars. The guy you're talking about wasn't here. Crow stayed silent. Maybe another station? No way. I'm the only one open till 9 around here. Back in his car, Crow checked the time. If Henry left around 8:30, as he claimed, and didn't go to the station, where was he? That gap, 30-40 minutes, now became the case's core. That night, Crow called Ellen to his office. He laid out a map of Pine Hill and Echo Lake, marking points with red pins: the Larkin house, gas station, Whitman's house, the trail to the woods. We've got a blank from 8:30 to 9:30. If Henry wasn't at the station, he was around here. Ellen studied the map. You think he hid the body that night? Crow didn't answer, just nodded slightly. I think it happened earlier, and what he took out wasn't for gas. They reviewed the search team's report. In the first day's log, a rescuer noted briefly, found adult shoe prints near the west fence, heading to the woods. Unclear if old or new. This was overlooked because heavy snow made timing impossible. Crow reread it, underlining in red, adding possibly Henry's. Late that night, his office was the only lit room in the station. Wind whistled through the trees outside, windows rattling. On the pinboard, yellow notes linked by red thread formed a timeline. 6 p.m. B feeds dog. Neighbor sees porch light. 7 p.m. Marjorie washes dishes. Henry in living room. 8:30 p.m. Henry claims went for gas. 9 p.m. Sarah Whitman hears dog barking and shouting. 9:15 p.m. Total silence. The gap lay between 8:30 and 9:15, 45 minutes. No one knew where Henry was, what he did, who he met. Crow sat still, tapping the desk, his mind circling that detail. What could a man do in 45 minutes, in a blizzard, when his wife's child vanished? The next morning, he returned to the Larkin house, with one question in mind. Henry opened the door, looking weary. Crow asked directly, "Did you go to the Hollow Creek gas station that night?" Henry paused for a second. "Yeah, but they probably don't remember me. I spoke to the gas station owner, he said he didn't see you. So what were you doing out there?" Henry shrugged. "Maybe I stopped halfway. It was snowing. I smoked. What's the big deal?" Crow stared into his eyes, but Henry only smirked, his gaze sliding elsewhere. On the drive back, Crow felt a weight settle over him. He had no solid evidence, just vague timelines and suspiciously smooth words. But with his experience, he knew the truth often hid in those very gaps, where no one wanted or dared to look. In the report sent to the state that weekend, he wrote, "Based on witness statements and gas station verification, an unaccounted-for period exists between 2030 and 2115, on the night of February 14, 1973. Sounds of an argument and dog barking coincide with this time frame. Henry Larkin likely left and returned to the house that night, whereabouts unclear." Crow closed the file, placed it on the desk, his gaze pensive. Outside, the ice was melting, dark patches of damp earth appearing around the wooden house's porch. He knew that when spring arrived, the snow would recede and might reveal what winter had concealed. And if there was one thing he was certain of after these long cold weeks, it was this: that 45-minute gap was no coincidence. It was where Bea's disappearance began, and perhaps where it ended. In April 1973, winter finally retreated from Windsor County. Snow melted slowly, leaving muddy puddles like open wounds in the forest soil. The roads around Echo Lake, blanketed white 3 months prior, reclaimed their true form, muddy, gloomy, and cold. Tall black pines stood silent on the slopes, their wet needles dripping endlessly, the scent of resin and damp earth mingling sharply. Sheriff Daniel Crow sat in his truck, flipping through his old notebook. The first page still bore his penciled note: possible domestic involvement, unprovable. He lightly underlined it, then added Echo Lake search. April. When the weather allowed, Crow had secured a warrant to resume searching around the lake, where the last footprints and flashlight were seen. Though no new leads had surfaced, he remained haunted by that empty window between 8:30 and 9 p.m. When Henry Larkin vanished into the blizzard, that morning, the search team of 6 mostly locals familiar with the woods, plus 2 officers and a canine named Brutus, split into 3 groups, combing the western shore of Echo Lake, a dense, rarely traveled area. Crow walked with young officer Ellen Birch, as always, silent and focused. Brutus led, nose to the wet ground. Beneath their feet, melted snow turned to slick mud. An old woodsman named Holt, part of the team, muttered, "If something's buried, this melt could bring it up." Crow didn't reply, only signaled to spread out farther. The metallic clink of shovels hitting stone echoed through the forest. By noon, the low sun pierced the tree canopy, glinting off the half-frozen lake. Ice cracked and drifted slowly, creaking like something breaking. The team moved along the water's edge. The silence was eerie. No birds, no insects, just a faint wind and boots sinking in mud. Early afternoon, Ellen called softly, "Sir, over here." Crow approached. Beneath her feet, among decayed leaves and dry branches, something gleamed in the sunlight. Ellen brushed the leaves with a gloved hand, revealing a thin metal chain wrapped around a rotted root. Crow picked it up. It was a small silver necklace, its oval pendant scratched, faintly engraved with 2 delicate letters. BL. Crow stood still. He turned the pendant over, noting the broken clasp, likely torn by force. In the case file, he recalled clearly, Beatrice Larkin wore a silver necklace with her initials, a birthday gift from her late father, killed in an accident years before. He placed it in an evidence bag, sealed it in nylon, labeled, "Found near Echo Lake, 041,973. The team continued searching the area, expanding a 200-meter radius. They dug 4 sunken spots, inspecting leaves and roots, but found only animal bones and broken glass. Brutus barked briefly, then collapsed, exhausted. Crow checked his watch, its minute hand crawling in the dim light. He knew the chances of further finds were slim. If Bea was buried here, time and water had erased the traces. By day's end, they marked the necklace's find spot with a wooden stake, logged the coordinates, and withdrew as light rain began. On the way back to the truck, Holt said quietly to Crow, "Sheriff, what do you think? If the girl was killed, her body's gotta be around here." Crow replied, voice hoarse from the cold. "Maybe, but sometimes, what we're looking for isn't out there. It's in that house." He glanced toward the hill, where the Larkin house's roof peeked through distant trees, smoke rising faintly from its chimney, like a thin silver thread. That evening, in his office, Crow set the evidence bag on the desk, the necklace glinting weakly under the yellow lamp. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Wadham recovered. Silver necklace, BL engraving. Found near Echo Lake. High probability, property of victim. No body located. Soil saturated. Search incomplete." One final line, smaller, slanting toward the page's edge. If the chain was torn, she didn't run. She struggled. Outside, night rain tapped the tin roof, steady as a countdown for a case growing cold. Crow leaned back, eyes closed, replaying the image of a brown-haired girl, her small hand clutching the dog on the porch. Now, only a fragile trace remained, the silver necklace with BL, sealed in a cold evidence bag, like the last breath of a case he couldn't let go. A year passed. Snow melted, spring rains faded, leaving the dark forests around Echo Lake. In June 1974, the first forensic report on the Bea Larkin case arrived at Ludlow Police Station from Vermont State Lab. The thin, creased brown file was stamped State Forensic Unit, Springfield Division. Sheriff Daniel Crow sat alone, a cold coffee mug on his desk, eyes fixed on the typewritten lines, dry, cold words, like the dying breath of a fading investigation. The report opened with a summary: fluid sample from Larkin kitchen scene, identified as human, containing typohemoglobin. No comparative DNA data available. Crow frowned, fingers tapping the desk's edge. In 1974, the state lab could only perform basic blood typing and enzyme analysis. Bea's blood sample, stored in a glass vial sealed with red wax, had been collected that blizzard night. Now, Results confirmed. It matched someone under 14, but couldn't identify her specifically. Page 2 listed other items: red fabric scrap, broken milk glass, dish rag, sink water soil, and the BL necklace from Echo Lake. The report stated, no foreign fingerprints detected, no fibers, hair or cells sufficient for identification, no physical evidence of coercion in kitchen or hallway. Another way of saying everything was clean, unnaturally so. Crow recalled the half-used rag in the sink and the scrubbed floor patch with bleach. Normal people didn't clean like that unless they knew what they were hiding. The report's final note stated the house footprints matched men's black leather shoes, worn heel on the right. Porch shoe prints too faint for dating. Henry Larkin, per records, wore such shoes. But in 1974, those prints, and the blood, couldn't be legal evidence. Vermont lacked rubber sole comparison or rare blood pattern analysis. Crow knew all he had were numbers and suspicion. That afternoon, he called the lab, the line crackling. A female technician's voice came through. "Sheriff, I know you're frustrated. We tried everything. If we had military-grade genetic tech, it might be different. But in Springfield, our spectrometer's down half the time." Crow only replied, voice rough, "I understand. Thanks. Keep that blood sample. Maybe one day it'll say what we can't hear yet." That night, he sat alone in his office, the desk lamp lighting a small corner. On the wall, the Pine Hill map still held red pins linked by thread, the last marked Echo Lake necklace. Since January, he'd worn himself out, scouring files, meeting people. Nothing, no new clues, no strangers, no sign of anyone at the Larkin house that night. Everything was sealed tight as an airless room. Ellen Birch, the young officer, knocked and entered. She placed papers on the desk, final copy. I typed the conclusion. Crow flipped to the first page, reading slowly. The last line of the scene report signed by him was bold. No evidence of outside intrusion. No clear indication of foul play. Case classification, missing person, suspicious circumstances. He stared at suspicious circumstances. It was the system's way of admitting defeat, not enough to call it a crime, not enough to say it wasn't. A limbo where everything hung between assumption and doubt. Ellen stood by, looking through the fogged window. "So that's it, sir?" Crow closed the file, eyes heavy. "For now, if something new comes up, we reopen." "You think that day'll come?" "Yes," he said, after a long pause. "I just don't know if any of us will live to see it." Outside, streetlights flickered on wet pavement post-rain. Last year's blizzard was now just memory. But when wind blew through the woods, Crow still heard the dog's halting barks, the soft creak of a wooden door, and a girl's voice calling a name in the night. Before leaving, he opened a drawer, placing B's blood vial in a metal evidence box labeled Evidence 74 B21. He locked it, the key clicking. Then, Crow lit a cigarette, watching smoke curl in the yellow light. He knew he'd reached the limit of a 1974 rural sheriff, where tech wasn't enough. Evidence wasn't enough, and justice sometimes stopped at a hunch's edge. Before turning off the lamp, he wrote one last line in the duty log. In pale blue ink, cause or perpetrator unidentified. Victim status, alive or dead, unknown. But instinct says she didn't leave that house freely. The office door closed, leaving the smell of smoke and the monotonous tick of the wall clock. Outside, Echo's woods sank into fog, and what remained of B. Larkin's case was a thin file, stamped, missing person, suspicious, an unfinished story, trapped in its era, waiting for time to tell the rest. Autumn, 1975. A cold rain swept Windsor County, carrying the last maple leaves onto Ludlow's police station tin roof. Sheriff Daniel Crow stood in his office, staring at the misty sky, before him the closed file. Beatrice Larkin, missing, 1973. The cover's ink had faded, but he couldn't bring himself to write closed. Instead, he lightly crossed out active investigation and wrote inactive, suspicious. The case of B. Larkin, The 12-year-old who vanished in a blizzard officially fell silent. No new witnesses, no discoveries, no charges. The press forgot, townsfolk stopped talking, and life in the small town moved on as if no child had been swallowed by winter. Henry Larkin sold the Pine Hill house, moving to Keene, New Hampshire, a quiet industrial town on the state border. He told neighbors he wanted to start over. They said he worked night security at a cement factory, lived quietly, his origins unclear. Co-workers recalled one thing: late nights, he'd sit smoking after shifts, staring into the void, silent, as if he'd said all he needed long ago. Marjorie, his wife, left Vermont the next year. She lived with her sister in Bennington, later remarried a postal worker, changed her name, her home, trying to erase the past. In her new marriage record, the children section was lightly crossed out. When asked, she only said, "That child is gone." By late 1975, Beatrice Larkin's file sat in the third drawer of Ludlow's archive. Among petty thefts, house fires, and traffic accidents, on the drawer, a black ink label, case #73LK, missing juvenile. Each year, Crow opened it once, just to ensure it was still there. Seeing the red wax-sealed blood vial and silver necklace in its nylon bag, he felt like a gravedigger for an unburied soul. Time passed. In 1983, Crow retired after over 20 years as sheriff. He left town, taking a few old items and a photo of Echo Lake from that winter, where they found the BL necklace. On his last day, he left a note in B's file: "Do not destroy. Case feels unfinished." From then, Beatrice Larkin's name slid to the bottom of missing persons lists. By the late 1980s, her file was a single line in a ledger: "Missing juvenile, Vermont, presumed runaway." No one corrected it, no one objected. When DNA tech emerged in the early 1990s, hundreds of U.S. cases reopened. But Ludlow, a small town, lacked funds and expertise. Old files, including Larkin's, were sent to Montpelier's Criminal Records Center. A young technician noted, "Box 74B21, Larkin, Beatrice. Missing since 1973. One envelope, one blood vial, one chain." There, the file sat silent in a basement archive, where fluorescent lights flickered, walls dusted, and names on labels were forgotten. The room stayed at 15 degrees Celsius. Time itself seemed frozen there. Nearly half a century passed. Machines changed, logs updated, staff replaced, files shifted to higher shelves, but box 74B21 remained in its spot, corner of rack 9, fourth row. The glass blood vial stayed intact, red wax seal untouched. No one opened it for nearly 50 years. In Keene, Henry Larkin lived alone into old age. Reclusive, rarely seen, he rented a small house near a forest road. Neighbors said each winter, he'd stand on his porch, watching snowfall, holding a small glinting object, perhaps an old necklace. Daniel Crow, now over 80, lived in Brattleboro, in a wooden house facing the woods. He forgot many cases' names, but when Echo Lake was mentioned, his eyes darkened. On foggy nights, he'd tell his wife, "I still think, if we'd dug a few feet deeper that year, we might have found her." All those people, Henry Marjorie Crow, aged quietly, carrying fragments of an unmentioned case. Only the Larkin file remained in Montpelier, in a morgue-like room, where forgotten stories waited for another hand. Another century, another technology, to finish what 1974 couldn't. October 2022, Vermont entered leaf fall season. Cold, damp air carried pine resin and mud along Echo Lake's trails, now visited only by anglers and occasional hikers. On the lake's west slope, evergreen logging began clearing a transport path, removing rotted old trees. That morning, weak sunlight pierced the canopy, thin fog draped the woods, silent but for the steady buzz of chainsaws. Around 9, Rick Donovan's excavator hit something hard. He stopped, thinking it was stone or root, but clearing dark soil revealed an ivory-white object. Donovan knelt, brushing it with a gloved hand. A small, rounded bone with a joint, not animal-like. "Might be human," he muttered, calling 2 workers over. They dug around the edge, finding more bone fragments, a dark red cloth scrap, and a thin mud-caked metal chain. Rinsed lightly, the chain's pendant showed two faintly engraved letters. Beale Donovan froze. Born in Ashford Hollow, he was old enough to recall the old story. The red coat girl lost in the '73 blizzard, whispered about by the town. He swallowed hard, told the crew to stop, and called Windsor County Police. Within an hour, the forest road was sealed off. 2 patrol cars arrived, their red and blue lights sweeping wet trees. Forensic techs in white suits set up nylon barriers around a 10-square-meter plot. Light rain fell, the afternoon's dim light, heavy as lead. Sheriff Judith Law arrived soon after. She walked slowly through the site, eyeing the dug pit where techs carefully collected bone fragments and cloth. "Keep everything intact," she said softly. A tech placed the necklace in a clear evidence bag, labeled item #001, Echo Lake Site. Nearby, bones were arranged in stainless trays, covered with damp paper to prevent cracking. The air reeked of wet earth and decayed leaves. By afternoon, the team identified about a dozen small bones, mostly wrist, rib, and spine. No soft tissue remained, but their size suggested a young person, possibly a teenager. A tech whispered, "These have been here a long time." Law didn't reply, only looked around. This forest was less than 200 meters from the lake shore, within the 1973 search radius, if she recalled correctly. News of the find spread fast across Windsor County. The Windsor County Bulletin ran a brief side column, "Human bones and evidence found at Echo Lake, police investigating." No names were mentioned, but old-timers knew what it meant. As night fell, rain turned to thick fog, and the techs finished collecting samples. Everything was sealed in metal boxes with a scene report. Windsor Police's final note read, "Human skeletal remains. Site Echo Lake, Windsor County. Associated item, silver necklace, initials BL." Judith Law signed the report, signaling the team to clean up. She glanced at the site one last time, where wooden stakes marked the dig spot. The soaked ground, with exposed roots, like skeletal hands clinging to mud, stared back. "If these bones are really someone's," she told her deputy, "they've been waiting here too long." The evidence van headed to Windsor County headquarters in the dark. Overhead, the moon was hidden by thick clouds, the police car's lights casting cold red streaks through the forest. As the convoy left, Echo Lake sank back into silence. Only the wind whispering through the pines and a forgotten red cloth scrap caught on a branch, swaying faintly. 4 days later, the samples arrived at the Burlington Forensic Lab. The building sat isolated on the outskirts, between 2 wet hills in Chittenden County, where fog clung each morning. In a room, lit by pale fluorescent light, the forensic team spread out bags labeled Echo Lake, October 22, 2022, on a cold metal table. Dr. Elise Grant, head of forensic anthropology, opened the first bag. Inside were 12 small bones, cleaned with sterile water and soft brushes. Wearing glasses, she said softly to a colleague, "This size, a juvenile, about 11 to 13 years old." Next was the rotted red fabric, just a few synthetic threads left, suggesting a winter coat from the 1970s. As she placed each bone on a stainless tray, Grant noticed the neck bone had a clean break, its surface finely cracked with no wear. She tilted her head, pointing to the fracture. "This is a 4th cervical vertebra break, peri mortem." The force was strong and direct, enough to kill instantly. Her assistant, intern Dr. Miller, silently noted, "Cause of death, fracture to the cervical vertebra. Probable homicide." The silver necklace was examined separately, under a microscope. Mud clung deep in the engraved grooves, but the initials BL were clear. Grant said nothing, only took a shallow breath, then placed it in a separate box. She had reviewed the old files sent by police, a 1974 report copy from Daniel Crow, with a blurry photo of a brown-haired girl in a red coat. 2 days later, the bones were sent for DNA analysis. The process took over 40 hours, grinding bone to powder, extracting marrow, isolating proteins, amplifying gene sequences. When the first result appeared on the screen, the technician paused for seconds. A simple line read, sample hash 22 echo matches, archive blood sample hash 73 Larkin. The 1973 comparison sample, the red wax-sealed blood vial, Crow collected from the Larkin kitchen, had been preserved for nearly half a century in Montpelier's archive. Though slightly oxidized, its DNA was intact enough for comparison. Grant held the printed results, gripping tightly. "No doubt," she said, "it's the same person." That evening, the preliminary forensic report was sent to Windsor County Police. The email's first line read, "Remains belong to a female child, aged approximately 11-13. Cause of death, neck fracture. DNA match with archived blood sample hash 73 Larkin. Likely identification, Beatrice Larkin." The next morning, Judith Law received the report at headquarters. She read it and sat still for a long time. Outside the window, low clouds hung, wind whistling through the last red maples. She recalled, as a rookie, hearing old officers talk of the red coat girl. Now, that name was no longer legend. It had bones, a cause of death, and biological evidence. Per protocol, police needed a living relative for final confirmation. They contacted Marjorie Hale, Bez's mother, then 82, living in a small town near Worcester, Massachusetts. When Judith Law called, the elderly woman was silent for a long time, saying only, "I knew this day would come. I dreamed of her so many times, still standing on the porch, in her red coat." 3 days later, Marjorie was brought to Burlington for a blood sample. She walked slowly, frail, carrying an old cloth bag embroidered with Bev, the only thing she'd kept for nearly 50 years. Grant took the sample herself. While awaiting results, Marjorie sat in the break room, gazing through glass at the technicians working. On the table, the silver necklace lay on a tray, its faint engraving catching the light. "She wore it every day," she said softly. "I looked everywhere. I didn't think she'd come back like this." 24 hours later, the comparison results printed. The report's final line, maternal DNA comparison, 99.998% match, positive identification. Beatrice Larkin, the girl missing since February 14, 1973, was confirmed. When Judith Law entered with the paper, Marjorie didn't cry. She only closed her eyes, nodding faintly. "I want to take her home," she said. Grant replied softly, "We'll release her to you after final tests." In the summary report to Vermont State, the conclusion was typed in bold, "Case reclassified, homicide." The file was officially reopened after 49 years. The legal basis stated, "New scientific evidence confirms victim died by violent means, not voluntary disappearance." That afternoon, leaving the lab, Judith Law paused in the long hallway to the parking lot. Light from the far window hit the floor, reflecting a pale silver, like the necklace's gleam. In her mind, Crow's old note resurfaced. "If that girl didn't leave the house freely, one day the truth will come back from the ground." Late that night, in Burlington's archive, the evidence tray was returned to storage: small bones, red fabric scrap, silver necklace. A new label read, "Case File 73LK reopened. Verified identity, Beatrice Larkin." Outside, Vermont's woods sank into autumn rain. Above, streetlights reflected through glass, glinting on the distant lake, where a child once vanished, and now was finally called by her name. November 2022. In the cold office of Vermont's Cold Case Unit, Lieutenant John Mercer received the file from Burlington. Its cover bore the old text, Case 73LK, Beatrice Larkin, reclassified homicide. In the corner, Daniel Crow's handwritten note remained. "Keep, case feels unfinished." Mercer opened the archive box. Inside were 1973 scene photos, the wooden house, small kitchen, faint snow footprints. He reread Crow's report. Short, sharp lines. "No break-in. Door opened from inside. Small blood stain near kitchen wall. Rag in sink." The final line, "Possible domestic involvement. Unprovable." Mercer underlined it in red, thinking he was right. Just no way to prove it then. He reconstructed the timeline. B vanished the night of February 14, 1973. Henry claimed to get gas at 8:30. Returned after 9 o'clock. During that window, a neighbor heard barking and arguing. Snow fell heavily. No stranger's tracks. To Mercer, the pieces were aligning. That afternoon, he spread the old map on his desk, overlaying current satellite images. The Larkin house sat at Pine Hill's End, over a mile from Echo Lake, a distance walkable in 45 minutes. Mercer drew a red line, house, woods, lake, a tight, discrete route, matching Henry's statement gap. He jotted a note, time of disappearance, 20:30, 21:15. Likelihood of body transport =high. Reviewing 2022 scene photos. Mercer paused at the rotted red cloth and BL necklace found near the slope. 100 meters away was an old dirt path used for small trucks. A path Crow couldn't access in 1973 due to snow. If Henry moved a body, this was his route. Mercer said softly, marking the map. The next day he met Judith Law, who oversaw the bone excavation. She said, the soil there had 2 disturbed layers. I believe the body was moved at least once. Mercer asked, so someone returned years later. She nodded. Could be him. He lived in Keene, just over an hour's drive. Mercer returned to headquarters, reopening old statements. Henry had said, the kid spilled soup. I scolded her. She ran off. But Marjorie's report noted that night's dinner was stew. A small detail, but Mercer paused. People slip when they rehearse lies, he thought. He added to his investigation log. Primary suspect, Henry Larkin. Alibi unverified. Statement contradictions. Kitchen blood confirms in-house conflict. That evening, Mercer used scene modeling software. The house appeared. Small kitchen. Back door to woods. He plotted Crow's points. Blood stain. Sink. Porch exit. The simulation showed a perpetrator's path, matching the route from kitchen to Echo Lake. Near midnight, he shut off the screen, looking out the window. Light snow fell on Montpelier. He opened Crow's old notebook one last time, rereading the 1974 line. If that girl didn't leave the house freely, the truth is in that house. The next morning, Mercer finalized his report to Vermont State. The conclusion was brief. Based on new evidence and contradictory statements, Henry Larkin is identified as the sole suspect in Beatrice Larkin's death. Recommend criminal reinvestigation. He signed, closed the file. On the last page, below his signature, he wrote a small, neat line. Reinvestigation initiated. Primary suspect, Henry Larkin. Outside, wind from Echo Lake carried early winter's chill. After nearly half a century, Bea Larkin's case was alive again. Not just a memory, but an open file, awaiting final proof. Early December 2022, Vermont had slipped into early winter, thick fog weaving through valleys like smoke. Lieutenant John Mercer drove the cold case unit's SUV south, back to Ashford Hollow, where it all began nearly half a century ago. Pine Hill Road was coated in thin ice, wooden houses scattered along it, their yellow lights dim through the fog. On the passenger seat, he carried a list of names from Crow's old file: Sarah Whitman, neighbor, Vince Carver, gas station owner, and Earl Noland, a hunter near Echoes Woods. Mercer knew most were old, but if alive, their memories might be the final link tying Henry Larkin to the scene. He first visited Sarah Whitman, now over 80, living in a small house at Pine Hill's crest. She opened the door, frail but sharp-eyed, her voice trembling yet clear. When Mercer mentioned the case, she nodded slowly. You're not the first to ask about that girl. I've lost count. But it's still that night, Valentine's 73. I remember it clear, she recounted. Snow was thick that night. I was about to turn off the light when I heard the Larkin's dog barking fiercely. It wouldn't stop, like it was being hit. Then a man's shout, deep, angry. After that, silence, nothing but wind. Did you see any light, or anyone outside? Mercer asked. No, just their back door ajar. A bit later, their house lights went out. I remember thinking, they must have gone to bed, but the dog never barked again. Mercer scribbled quickly, then asked, "Did you hear a vehicle?" Whitman shook her head. "Not sure, but next morning, clearing my path, I saw strange tire tracks on the dirt road to the woods. Not mine, not anyone's in the neighborhood. Fresh snow, so they stood out." He looked up. "Did you tell the police then?" "I mentioned it to the search team leader, but they said it could have been their rescue vehicles." Mercer nodded slightly. "Those tire tracks were never in the 1973 file. Crow might never have heard this." That afternoon, he visited the old Hollow Creek gas station. New owners ran it, but Vince Carver, 84, lived in a house out back. The old man hobbled out with a cane, frowning, when Henry Larkin's name came up. "The cement factory guy? I remember him. Cold, quiet." "What? That case still open?" Mercer replied, "We're reviewing." "You said you didn't see Henry that night, but what about the next morning?" Carver thought, then chuckled. "Yeah, I remember. Morning after, he bought 2 50-pound bags of dry cement." I joked, "Paving roads in a blizzard?" He said he needed to patch the dog kennel floor. Funny thing, I never saw him with a dog after that night. Mercer stared, silent for seconds. "You remember the vehicle he loaded?" "Old gray pickup, covered in dust. I helped him load the cement, saw the truck bed lined with a dirty tarp, wet mud stuck to it. I told him, 'Looks like you just came from the woods.'" Carver gave a thin smile. "Didn't think much of it, but years later, when the papers mentioned the red coat girl, I remembered. He bought cement that morning." "Odd, right?" Mercer thanked him, got a signed statement, and left. In the car he wrote, February 15th, 1973. "Henry Larkin bought 2 cement bags at Hollow Creek. Claim patch kennel floor. Aligns with Crow's suspicion of scene cleanup. Likelihood cement used to cover blood, hasty burial, =high." Before leaving town, Mercer visited the last witness, Earl Noland, an old hunter living near Echoes Woods, less than a mile from the bone site. The man's lakeside cabin was weathered, his face tanned, hands still rough. Hearing the case, he went quiet, then said, "I never forgot that night. My hunting dog was going crazy, barking toward the Larkin house. I opened the door, heard a faint truck engine start, then stop. Around past 9, snow was thick, but I swear I saw headlights flicker on some trees toward the woods. Faint, but then nothing." Mercer asked, "Did you check it out?" "No, too cold, and I thought someone's truck broke down. But next morning, checking my traps near the lake, I saw the ground churned, snow dug into a long trench. Footprints too, I told the search team. But they said it might have been their canine tracks." He looked at Mercer, eyes heavy. "When I saw the news about that girl, I knew something was off there. But who listens to an old hunter back then?" Mercer sat still. 3 accounts, neighbor, gas station owner, hunter, formed a clear timeline, shouting. A vehicle leaving at 9 o'clock. Henry, buying cement the next morning. Driving back to Montpelier, light snow dusted the windshield. Mercer stopped at a rest area, opened his notebook, and summarized, 20:45, shouting, dog barking. Then silence. 21 o'clock, headlights toward Echo Woods. 7:30 next morning. Henry Larkin buys 2 cement bags. No dog in the house after 02:15. He underlined the last 2 lines. Cement, likely used to cover scene. Back at the office, Mercer spread the map, adding 3 new red pins. Whitman, Noland, Carver, all within a 2-mile radius of the Larkin house. At the center, Henry's name, circled heavily. That night, in a preliminary report to Vermont's Justice Department, Mercer concluded briefly, new statements strengthen the likelihood the victim was killed in the house, then moved and buried temporarily. The next morning's construction material purchase confirms intent to conceal. He closed the notebook, sat still. Outside, snow thickened, streetlights casting long beams on the desk. Beal Larkin's case was no longer an old file's tale. It was alive, with real voices of those who still remembered. And in all those accounts, one name echoed, from 1973 to now, Henry Larkin. Second week of December, 2022. The first blizzard swept Ashford Hollow, leaving thin ice on roofs and the dirt road down Pine Hill. Lieutenant John Mercer returned to the former Larkin house, this time with an official search warrant from Vermont's court. The current owners, Bill and Nora Preston, agreed to cooperate after Mercer explained the DNA results and new clues. The house looked much like the 1973 photos, only with faded green paint. The basement, rebuilt in 1980, had a smooth cement floor, but Mercer recalled Crow's old note, bleach smell, fresh cement near kitchen. There, Crow had suspected something, but couldn't dig without evidence. Now, 49 years later, they returned to finish what Crow couldn't. The Windsor County forensic team arrived at 8 a.m. 3 technicians brought ground scanners, UV lights, and drilling tools. Mercer stood by, flipping his notebook, priority area. Foundation near southeast corner, 2 meters from stair. Crow marked this in his 1974 diagram. Preston nodded, gripping his hands. I just want to know what happened under my house. The GPR machine hummed. Its screen showed steady waves until a denser oval shape appeared, about 40 centimeters below the cement. A technician looked up, saying softly, "Something's here." Not a pipe. The basement air seemed to freeze. Mercer signaled to drill. The sound of the concrete cutter echoed in the tight space. Chunks of cement broke away, white dust clouding the flashlights. When the first layer cracked, a damp, earthy smell rose sharply. Beneath was a layer of gray cement-mixed sand, and in it, a small white object protruded. "Stop," Mercer said, kneeling. He used tweezers to extract a tiny bone, less than 3 centimeters long, shaped like a finger joint. Nearby, a technician picked up a few reddish-brown strands stuck in the wet soil. The team stood still. The hair retained its roots, viable for DNA testing. Mercer stared at it, voice hoarse. This is what Crow smelled, but never reached. All evidence was placed in sealed boxes. They continued digging the area but found only compacted soil, indicating a temporary burial, not a deep grave. Examining the basement walls, a technician pointed out discolored cement patches, suggesting a hasty re-pour after digging. "Someone sealed this quickly," he said. "And the material matches the cement Henry Larkin bought on the morning of February 15, 1973. That afternoon, Mercer brought the samples to Burlington's lab. Dr. Elise Grant, who handled the Echo Lake remains, received them. She examined the bone, noting, "Juvenile, finger bone. The hair has intact follicles, enough for DNA extraction." 2 days later, results came back. DNA matched Beatrice Larkin's perfectly. The report's conclusion was brief. Recovered sample genetically identical to remains from Echo Lake. Material consistent with short-term burial, later removal. Mercer read it, closing his eyes. He knew this was the final evidence. Bea's body had been temporarily buried under the house, then dug up and moved to the woods for disposal. Henry's cement purchase the next morning, corroborated by Carver's statement, was now fully confirmed. On December 18th, Mercer returned to the house, updating the Prestons. They stood in the basement, where the drilled section was now covered with plastic. Nora asked softly, "Do you believe he did it?" Mercer looked around the room, cold light filtering through a small window. "I don't believe. I know." In the report to Vermont State, his conclusion was 4 lines. Physical evidence recovered beneath the original Larkin residence confirms prior burial. DNA match with Beatrice Larkin. Conclusion: body concealed temporarily and later relocated to Echo Lake. Offense: homicide with post-mortem tampering. That evening, Mercer stayed in his office, studying photos of the drilled cement, mud-soaked hair, and tiny bone. He thought of Crow, who stood in this house half a century ago, sensing something wrong, but bound by his era's limits. Now, every piece fit: kitchen blood, cement bought the next morning, body moved to Echo Lake. He turned on the recorder, speaking slowly. "Beatrice Larkin file, confirmation complete. We found where it began, and know where it ended." Wind howled through bare trees outside. Mercer turned off the recorder, closed the file. In the quiet room, Only faint echoes of the past remained: hammer strikes, a dog's bark, and a silence long as half a century. Beneath the Pine Hill house's basement, where cement had been broken, only an empty hollow remained, a trace of what Vermont took nearly 50 years to find. 3 days after DNA confirmed the body was temporarily buried at the Larkin house, Lieutenant John Mercer finalized the preliminary investigation summary. The 300-page file was sealed, labeled, and read: Behavioral Review. Request for profiling assistance. He sent all data from Crow's old reports to 2022 evidence to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Center in Quantico, Virginia. On December 22, Mercer received a call from Dr. Elise Tarrant, a BAU-2 criminal psychologist specializing in domestic homicides. Her voice was calm, firm. We reviewed your file. Henry Larkin fits the profile of a domestic impulsive killer, acting on family conflict, spontaneous but calculated in concealment. The official Quantico report arrived a week later. Page 1 was titled, Behavioral Analysis Report. Subject: Henry Larkin. Mercer read its lines repeatedly. Larkin exhibits traits of a controlling family figure, rigid, disciplinary, lacking empathy. Violent acts often erupt when challenged or feeling loss of power. Initial targets are typically pets or children, vulnerable, less resistant. The second section listed behaviors from 1973 statements. Henry once beat the dog for messing the kitchen. It died from neck trauma. The night B vanished, the dog barked fiercely, then stopped. Too coincidental. Experts concluded high likelihood pet abuse was a trigger event, a precursor to human-directed violence. Mercer flipped to the crime behavior timeline. Evening family conflict. Henry scolds and strikes B after dog's death. Victim's reaction: flees or pleads, barking and shouting heard by neighbor, killing manual attack, neck fracture, instant death. Aftermath: cleans blood with rag, buries temporarily in basement, buys cement next morning to seal floor. Months later, digs up body, moves to Echo Lake Woods, Reveries. The report added, body relocation shows intent to conceal, not panic. Subject likely remained calm post-crime, displaying cold detachment, characteristic of controlled remorses group. Mercer paused at the psychological assessment. Larkin fits the profile of a man viewing himself as absolute household authority, seeing a child's defiance as an insult. No evidence of premeditated murder, but all signs point to sudden violent escalation, result of years of suppression. Post-act, subject shows no emotion, stays silent, believing he handled an issues, rather than committed a crime. Below, Dr. Tarrant's conclusion. Case aligns with domestic abuse homicide. Scene cleanup and later body relocation indicate clear guilt awareness. High emotional control, capable of lifelong concealment without remorse. Mercer read late into the night. The office window reflected white light, snow falling heavily outside. He thought of Crow's words from half a century ago, too calm. Now behavioral science proved what Crow sensed instinctively. The next morning, Mercer called Tarrant to confirm details. You believe this was impulsive? No accomplices? Correct, Tarrant replied. No premeditation signs, but post-crime concealment. He likely buried the body that night, dug it up later, fearing discovery. Classic control-obsessed behavior. How do you rate the cruelty? Not sadistic. It's the coldness of someone believing they're right. With this type, remorse doesn't exist, just silence. The call ended. Mercer noted, FBI profile, domestic impulsive killer, controlled remorse. Subject, Henry Larkin. Motive: anger plus control. He leaned back, staring at Henry's old file photo. Square face, cold eyes, lips pressed tight. Not mad, not drunk, not desperate, just emotionless. That afternoon, Mercer sent a summary to Vermont's Justice Department, attaching a final note. FBI Quantico behavioral report supports Henry Larkin as the sole suspect with motive, means, and psychological traits matching the crime. Recommend advancing to financial and background verification before posthumous prosecution. Shutting down his computer, he looked out the window. Snow-blanketed roofs, flakes, drifting past streetlights. Mercer thought Henry never feared arrest, only that science would one day name the truth. And now, it had. January 2023. Cold wind swept through Keene, New Hampshire's empty streets, scattering thin snow from roofs. Lieutenant John Mercer left Windsor County Police Headquarters at dawn, driving over an hour east across the state line. On the passenger seat, a thick file was neatly clipped. Case 73 LK, Beatrice Larkin. Suspect, Henry Larkin. He knew this trip was the end of nearly half a century's silence. Henry's house sat at the town's edge, a small single story with a sloped roof and heavy curtained windows. A neighbor said, "He rarely goes out, just listens to the radio and smokes." When Mercer knocked, a dog barked briefly, then stopped. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Henry Larkin, thinner than his old photos, hair white, eyes cloudy. He glanced at Mercer's badge, then said softly, "Vermont, right? I knew it. It's time." Inside, the house was warmer, smelling of tobacco and rusted metal. Mercer opened his notebook, voice steady. "I'm here about the night of February 14th, 1973. About your stepdaughter, Beatrice Larkin." Henry sat on a wooden chair, hands trembling slightly, but his voice even. "I've been waiting for someone to ask this for a long time." Mercer turned on the recorder. "Are you ready to give an official statement?" Henry nodded. "As long as you hear it all." He spoke slowly, eyes distant. "It was brutally cold that night. The kid spilled the stew pot. I yelled at her. I swear I didn't mean to hurt her. She cried. Then the dog went crazy barking. I lost it. I turned, told her to shut up. She said something, I don't recall, just remember pushing her, harder than I meant." Henry paused, hands clasping. "She hit the wall. I heard a crack, then no sound." Mercer stayed silent. The room held only the clock's ticking. Henry continued. "I knew she was dead. Marjorie screamed. I told her to leave. I carried the kid to the basement, put her in a wooden box. That night, I didn't sleep, just sat staring at that spot. Then the next morning?" Mercer asked. "I went to Hollow Creek Station, bought 2 cement bags. I poured the floor. I thought if it's gone, no one would ask." Mercer flipped his notebook. "Why move her to the woods years later?" Henry looked down, silent for a long moment. Faint light from the window made his face waxen. "Because I heard her," he said softly. "Small footsteps on the floor, every night, from the kitchen to the basement. I thought it was wind, but it wasn't. I knew she was still there, waiting." Mercer sat straighter, asking slowly, "And what did you do?" Henry gave a faint, almost whispered laugh. "I dug her up, drove to Echo Lake, buried her under a pine. I thought I was doing right, but the footsteps stayed in my head." Mercer didn't write, letting the recorder run. He said, "You know they found her remains?" Henry looked up, eyes flickering. "I figured, I haven't slept in weeks. I dreamed of Crow, that old cop." He looked at me like he knew everything. "Do you regret it?" Henry paused. "Don't know. I don't think about regret anymore. I'm just tired of holding this so long." Mercer ended the questioning, noting time and place. He turned off the recorder saying, "You've just admitted to killing and burying Beatrice Larkin. We'll forward this to Vermont's courts." Henry nodded. "I've got nothing left to hide." That afternoon, they took him to Keene's police station for formal booking. In the small interrogation room, a camera sat in the corner. Henry sat upright, hands clasped, voice hoarse. "I want to tell it all, so she doesn't wander anymore." Mercer started the video, asking systematically, "On February 14th, 1973, did you strike or push Beatrice?" "Yes." "Did you realize that action caused her death?" "Not right then. But when I saw blood from her nose, I knew." "What did you do next?" "I cleaned the spot, wrapped her in a blanket, took her to the basement. I was scared but couldn't tell anyone. I thought burying her would make it pass. Why Echo Lake? It was a place she liked. The summer before, we picnicked there. I thought she'd rest there. Mercer stayed silent a moment. He knew these words outweighed any evidence. Final question: did you lie about the dog's death? Henry nodded, sighing. I killed it. It kept barking, drove me crazy. I thought, if it stopped, she'd stop. But no one stopped. When the recording ended, Henry leaned back, eyes closed. Mercer turned off the camera, signed the report, and handed Henry the paper to sign. Henry took the pen, hand trembling slightly, his scrawl clear. Henry T. Larkin, January 18, 2023. Leaving the room, Mercer met the duty officer's eyes. Is he telling the truth? The officer asked. Mercer replied softly. True enough to match every piece we have. Before taking Henry to holding, Mercer asked, why didn't you run? You had nearly half a century. Henry looked straight. Run where? I kept hearing her. Sometimes in the rain, sometimes on the floor. You can take me now, as long as she's at peace. As the car took Henry away, Keene's snow fell heavily. Mercer stood on the porch, watching white flakes slant through yellow light. He knew the case had a confession, but the feeling wasn't victory, only emptiness. Nearly 50 years, a child buried twice, a man living with his own guilt. That night, he returned to Vermont with the original recording and statement copies. Crossing the border, thick snow blanketed fields. Mercer turned on the heater, muttering, I heard her footsteps every night. Henry's words echoed in his mind, blending with the wind's howl through distant pines. In Vermont's deep winter dark, Mercer knew Beatrice Larkin's case had finally found its true voice, a recorded confession, ending half a century's silence. 3 weeks after Henry Larkin's confession, Vermont's snow hadn't melted. The Beatrice Larkin homicide file moved to the final stage. Lieutenant John Mercer spent late February writing the closing report, where every piece aligned: confession, DNA evidence, forensic conclusions. The case seemed complete, but on the morning of February 27, 2023, his office phone rang. The duty officer's voice was urgent. Lieutenant Maine State Police just called. A woman in Portland claims to be Beatrice Larkin. Mercer looked up, thinking he misheard. Say that again. She gave her full name, birth date matching the file, June 14, 1961. Says she lived in Ashford Hollow, Vermont, and never died. Within an hour, Mercer was at Portland's police station. The woman sat in a small interrogation room, graying hair, thin face, but familiar deep brown eyes. As he entered, she stood, voice trembling. You're the one investigating my case, right? I'm Beatrice Larkin. Mercer stared, his heart slowing. Every wrinkle, glance, even the mole under her left eye, matched the old photo of the red-coated girl. He stayed calm. You say you're Beatrice. Where have you been for nearly 50 years? She said in 1973, after her stepfather's beating, she fled, was taken in by a Bangor, Maine couple, and given a new name. As Anna Moore, she worked as a nurse for years, unaware she was declared missing. I didn't dare go back. My mom feared Henry, so did I, she said, tears on her cheeks. I only learned of the case when I saw news of his arrest. I had to say I'm alive. Mercer sat stunned. Everything he knew, all the evidence he'd connected, wavered. He requested an immediate blood sample, sent urgently to Burlington Forensic Lab. 2 days later, a preliminary report returned. DNA comparison, sample Portland, 2023 versus Henry Larkin, Marjorie Hale, 99.94% compatibility. The result was a shock. Biologically, the Maine woman was directly related to both Henry and Marjorie, exactly like the real Beatrice. News spread fast. That evening, Vermont Public News ran a headline, Missing Girl Found Alive After 50 Years, Beatrice Larkin Surfaces in Maine. National papers and TV stations picked it up. Photos of the gray-haired woman appeared beside the old red-coated girl's image. An evening broadcast opened, a case thought closed has taken a stunning turn. Mercer fielded relentless calls. Reporters asked, "Whose body is at Echo Lake?" Prosecutors asked, "Is Henry's confession still valid?" Even Marjorie Hale, now 83, was brought to Portland to meet the woman claiming to be her daughter. When they faced each other, Marjorie hugged her tightly, trembling, "Your voice. Just like when you were little." Mercer stood in the corner, watching, mind reeling. He knew a second technical verification was needed, as the first DNA test used quick plasma analysis. He ordered Burlington's lab to run a full genomic sequence with marrow replication, comparing it to the Echo Lake bones. 3 days later, the second result arrived, stamped confidential. Mercer read, sweat chilling his hands. Genomic comparison between Beatrice Larkin, Portland, and skeletal remains. Echo Lake 2022, 99.98% match. Both samples share identical mitochondrial DNA. He reread it 3 times. The results said the bones and the woman shared the same DNA. Genetically, they were the same person. The lab added a note, possibility of monozygotic twins or fabricated data not ruled out. Recommend legal identity verification. Mercer dropped the papers on the desk. Henry's words from the interrogation echoed in his mind. "I heard her footsteps every night." Could Henry have not killed the real daughter, but someone else? Or was the body at Echo Lake never Beatrice? The press hadn't yet learned of the second result. Meanwhile, Portland became a media frenzy. Dozens of reporters swarmed the woman's small apartment. When asked, she only said, "I just want peace. I don't understand why people say I died." Mercer returned to Vermont, heavy-hearted. On the road, he called Judith Law. "We have 2 Beatrices, one in the file, one living in Maine, both with matching DNA." Judith was silent. "What do you think?" "I don't know," Mercer replied. "But this case isn't over. It may never have started right." Back at the office, he opened the old photo of the red-coated girl, placing it beside the recent Portland woman's picture. The smiles matched, the eyes matched, but something in the woman's gaze unsettled him, a detachment, as if her memories weren't hers. Mercer wrote in his investigation log, self-proclaimed Beatrice Larkin. DNA matches both parents plus remains, possibilities, mistaken identity, fraud, or a more complex truth. He leaned back, watching snow fall outside. The office radio played the evening news. Beatrice Larkin, Vermont's missing child, found alive after nearly 50 years. Mercer closed his eyes. For him, the case wasn't closed, it had just opened another door. Colder, murkier, filled with echoing footsteps from the past. Early March, 2023. Vermont still reeled from the shock of Beatrice Larkin's return from the dead. National TV and papers ran relentless headlines. But in the cold case unit office, Lieutenant John Mercer felt only unease. The DNA numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the full truth. He knew something was wrong, and only a background check could unravel it. Mercer began by requesting Maine police provide all civil records for the woman claiming to be Beatrice Larkin. She was registered as Anna Moore, later changed to Beatrice L. Hale, in 2005. All documents, birth certificate, passport, medical records, were legally issued. But digging deeper, he found an anomaly. No original birth certificate existed before 1982, 9 years after the real Bea vanished. In the 1982 document, the father was listed as Henry T. Larkin, mother unknown. Mercer's blood ran cold. He contacted Keene's Civil Records Office, where Henry lived post-1975, and received an old file, a birth certificate, stored in archives, for Annabelle Lowell, born 1971. Mother Ellen Lowell, a woman who worked at the cement factory with Henry. With the files side by side, Mercer needed no more. The Beatrice Larkin in Maine was Annabelle Lowell, Henry's daughter from another mother. He called Burlington's forensic lab, requesting a reanalysis of all DNA samples with this in mind. Results returned in 48 hours, stamped genetic comparison, subject shares 50% paternal DNA with Henry Larkin. Non-maternal match with Marjorie Hale, relationship. Half-sibling. The truth exploded. Mercer realized Henry's deception hadn't stopped with his confession. He returned to Keene with a new summons. Henry, in custody for manslaughter, gave a faint smile as Mercer entered the interrogation room. "So you met the girl, huh? Not Bea," Mercer replied coldly. "Annabelle Lowell, your daughter, with Ellen Lowell. She helped you stage this whole story." Henry shrugged, eyes etched with fatigue. "So what? She needed money. I needed peace." Mercer opened the file, placing it on the table. "You had her pose as Beatrice to claim death benefit insurance, didn't you?" Henry laughed. "Hoarse. When they found the bones, I knew the press would go wild. I thought, if someone showed up, said she was alive, they'd close the case. I didn't expect her to turn herself in." Mercer stared. "When did you contact her?" Henry sighed. "I reconnected in 2010. Her mom was dead. I sent money to help her in Maine. When this case reopened, I told her to claim she was Bea. I thought a few basic tests would be enough to throw them off. I didn't know they kept the 1973 blood sample." "You knew exactly," Mercer said slowly, "that it was evidence of murder. What were you afraid of?" Henry fell silent, cloudy eyes fixed on the metal table. "The footsteps. They never stopped, even after I reburied her. I thought if someone claimed she was alive, I could sleep." Mercer inhaled deeply. "You killed your daughter, then deceived the system to deny your own crime." Henry smirked. "I did what I knew, buried her, and lied." The interrogation ended near midnight. Mercer signaled the officer to seal the recording. The next morning, March 17, 2023, Henry Larkin was formally charged with 3 counts: manslaughter, concealing a body, and federal financial fraud. A press release went out that afternoon. The headline was brief: "Vermont reopens 1973 case. Henry Larkin arrested for homicide and fraud." As the news spread, those who followed the case for 50 years fell silent. The story, thought resolved by the victim's return, was now just another layer of deception, orchestrated by the killer himself. In the final report to the Vermont prosecutor's office, Mercer summarized the events. Henry Larkin killed Beatrice Larkin in 1973. Buried her under the basement. Months later, he moved the body to Echo Lakes Woods. When the case reopened, he used his other daughter, Annabelle Lowell, to pose as the deceased, to mislead and profit from a 1975 insurance policy. $60,000, reactivated in 2012. Mercer's conclusion added one final line, in slanted blue ink: "Ultimate motive, conceal guilt, and seek peace in delusion." On Henry's trial day, reporters flooded Keene. He appeared in a gray prison uniform, gaunt, eyes vacant. As the prosecutor read the charges, Henry said only 4 words: "I don't deny it." That same day, Annabelle Lowell, New B, was arrested in Portland for identity fraud and complicity in federal crime concealment. She admitted Henry contacted her by letter, sent old documents and B's photos, told her to memorize childhood details, promising half the insurance money if the case closed. "He said one lie would free us both," Annabelle stated. "I believed him because he was my father." That evening after the arrests, Mercer sat in his office, looking at stacked files. Crow, Grant, Law, all who contributed over this near half-century journey. On the wall, the old Pine Hill house photo was now framed, with Crow's note taped below. "If that girl didn't leave freely, the truth will return from the ground." It had returned, through soil, bones, confessions, and final lies. Mercer closed the file, writing in the summary report, "Case 73 LK officially resolved, conviction pending. Primary perpetrator, Henry Larkin." As he turned off the light, dusk's faint glow reflected on the fogged window, snow still falling outside. None of them, Crow then, Mercer now, imagined justice for a 12-year-old, would take nearly 50 years. But it had come, quietly, coldly, decisively. June 2023, Windsor County Court, Vermont, held a special trial for State of Vermont versus Henry T. Larkin, a case begun nearly half a century ago, now called the Trial of Time. Outside, light rain fell, winter's snow freshly melted, revealing wet earth and a faint scent of young pine in the breeze. Inside the courtroom, an unusual stillness prevailed. The gallery was full, mostly Ashford Hollow locals and reporters who'd covered the Red Coat Girl. In the front row, Lieutenant John Mercer sat quietly, file on his lap, badge clipped to his vest pocket. At the defendant's table, Henry Larkin, now 81, gaunt, white-haired, hands neatly folded. He looked at no one, eyes vacant, staring into space. Vermont prosecutor Evelyn Rhodes opened calmly. "Your Honor, this is not just a murder case, but proof of justice's endurance. In 1973, a 12-year-old girl was killed by her stepfather. In 2023, through scientific advances and investigators' tenacity, that case is finally closed." She presented the evidence chain: kitchen blood, basement cement, Echo Lake remains, silver necklace, and Henry's recorded confession. Each item flashed on a large screen, precise, chilling. When the recording played Henry's words, "I heard her footsteps every night," the courtroom fell utterly silent. The defense offered little rebuttal. The lawyer said, only, "My client is old, no longer a threat. He's lived half a life with guilt, and now confesses willingly. We ask for leniency." Henry was allowed to speak. He stood, voice hoarse, weak but clear. "I'm not here to justify. I did a terrible thing and carried it my whole life. I buried her twice, once under the house, once in my heart. Every night, I heard her. I thought confessing would let her rest. Maybe now it will." He sat, eyes half closed, no tears. Judge Harold Vance, once a young Ludlow officer in the 70s, read the verdict slowly. "The court finds defendant Henry Thomas Larkin guilty of manslaughter, concealing a body, and federal financial fraud. Total sentence, 25 years imprisonment without parole." The gavel struck, dry and final. Henry nodded slightly, unmoved. A few in the gallery wept. Others stood silently. After the trial, Mercer stepped into the hallway. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. One asked, "Lieutenant Mercer, how does it feel to close this case after 50 years?" He paused, looked at them, then answered in a low, slow voice. "It's not victory, it's closure. A blood sample, kept for half a century, brought justice back. It proves time can bury traces, but not guilt." His words headlined the Burlington Times the next morning. Below a photo of Mercer standing in the rain, face weary but resolute. In the weeks that followed, the case's ripple spread across America. Media dubbed it the case revived. After 49 years, and law schools and criminology institutes cited it as a classic example of forensic archiving's power. Burlington's lab was commended for preserving the 1973 blood vial, the evidence that rewrote the ending. In Montpelier, File 73LK was closed for good. Mercer, Judith Law, and Dr. Elise Grant co-signed the handover report. Grant said softly, "If Crow were alive, he'd smile." Mercer nodded, looking at his signed paper, and replied quietly, "And he'd say, 'I told you, the truth is in the ground.'" On June 30th, 2023, Henry was transferred to Vermont's Newport State Prison. On the way, heavy rain fell suddenly. As the van passed a slope, he looked out the window, seeing Echo Lake's woods faint in the fog. He closed his eyes, whispering, "Can you hear it?" No one answered. Marjorie Hale, Bee's mother, didn't attend the trial. She passed 2 months earlier, leaving a handwritten note to Mercer. "I just wanted my daughter called by her name. Thank you." The letter was kept in the original file, beside Bee's childhood photo, a brown-haired girl in a red coat, smiling brightly, taken on the porch in winter 1972. In July, Mercer returned to Echo Lake one last time. The lake was fully thawed, its surface mirror flat, reflecting a clear summer sky. A light breeze carried pine resin. He walked to the wooden stake from years ago, where the silver BL necklace was found. Now, a small stone marker stood there, engraved, Beatrice Larkin, 1961-1973. She was found, and she was heard. Mercer knelt, placing a red maple sprig on the stone. He didn't pray, just stayed silent. The wind through the woods sounded like the earth's long breath. Behind him, Echo Lake shimmered in the sun, calm, clear, no howling wind, no distant dog barks from that year. As he left, he looked back once more. Echo's wood stood, older but unchanged. He thought of Crow, the lost years, the half-century wait for a piece of truth. Justice might never come on time, but when it did, it arrived with silence. Late that afternoon, Mercer returned to Montpelier. In the office, day's end light slanted through the glass, falling on the sealed old file. He picked up his pen, writing the final entry in the case log. Case 73 LK, closed. Justice served after 49 years. Echo Lake, once silent, now at peace. He set the pen down, stood, and turned off the light. Outside, rain fell softly, mingling with the wind. Vermont sank into June's peaceful evening. And somewhere in the woods, the snow was gone, the lake mirror still. No traces remained of storms, cement, or guilt. Only absolute stillness, as if the land had finally rested after 50 years of waiting. The story of Beatrice Larkin is not just a half-century criminal case, but a profound reflection of how modern American society views justice, family, and collective memory. In a nation that champions individual freedom, this case reminds us that justice lies not only in trials or verdicts, but in the persistence of those who refuse to let truth be buried. Lieutenant John Mercer, who reconnected the broken thread between past and present, embodies that spirit, a spirit unyielding to time, like the thousands of investigators, journalists, and American citizens still fighting to solve real-life cold cases today. From Henry Larkin, a seemingly ordinary stepfather harboring silent violence, we see the importance of recognizing domestic abuse, a problem still prevalent in American society. The story reminds us that evil doesn't always come from strangers, but sometimes from within quiet homes. Silence, shame, and blind trust are what prolong tragedy. The blood sample kept for 50 years symbolizes the power of science and faith in truth, two cornerstones of America's justice system. It teaches that in the modern world, justice is never truly lost, only forgotten, waiting to be awakened. The greatest lesson of Beatrice Larkin's case is this: time can fade everything except guilt and love. A society only truly progresses when it remembers its past, confronts its mistakes, and protects the vulnerable. Even if late, it's never too late to do what's right. If you believe justice, however delayed, is worth pursuing, please subscribe to our channel to join us in exploring cases forgotten by time. Thank you for following Beatrice Larkin's journey. See you in the next video, where truth will once again emerge from the shadows.